thank you to Interplas for inviting me to speak here today. It's excellent that the topic or theme of the exhibition is Innovation Happens Here, and that's very much the space that we want to all operate in. I think I've been asked to speak in respect of Wales and one of the national governments in the UK because we're doing quite well on recycling. We have a particular focus on plastics, and we have form or history in relation to the carrier bag charge, which we were the first government to bring that into the UK. Noting that isn't just for plastic bags, it's also for paper bags and other single-use materials. Okay, the Welsh Government has a statutory duty to promote sustainable development, one of only 3 institutions around the world, as far as we know, that has that statutory driver. So obviously the financial, social and environmental aspects of waste and sustainable consumption and production are paramount. And importantly, we have set a One Planet resource use goal for 2050 for the Welsh nation. And we currently use 3 planets worth of resources. Neil's comment earlier about the importance of waste reduction and reducing material use are very important in this context. As the developing nations aspire to the affluence that we have in the Western world, and they want to emulate our 3 planets worth of consumption levels, how can that possibly happen? We only have 1 planet. So Wales wants to do its bit to contribute towards that and perhaps lead the way, as we have done on a few things so far. I don't think I need to tell you, and perhaps it'd be rude of me to totally dwell on this, but there is a huge amount of concern globally, nationally, locally about plastic pollution of the land, of our rivers and of the sea, and that needs seriously addressing. Also, a little slide I took of my Swansea civic amenity site recently just really encapsulates the problems that the consumer has in terms of recycling plastic. Even I was struggling to work out whether the article that I took to the civic amenity site, which category it fitted in. You really had to put your glasses on to look at that carefully. But that's just a good example of the complexities, and that's just hard plastics at the civic amenity site. I'm sure you've all read the report from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but I've read figures of something like 8 to 15% of plastic is recycled. The rest goes to landfill or incineration or leaks out into the environment. I'm not convinced anyone has really got the accurate figures with all of this, partly because it's so difficult to measure. The EU is doing its bit in terms of the circular economy package and also its strategy on plastics for the circular economy. And I think that's due to be published towards the end of this year. So there is a lot going on. Importantly, businesses, we heard from Neil earlier, and I put one of your slides up there, I think, yes. There's a lot going on. Major countries around the world, major economies have embraced the circular economy as part of their economic development strategies. Let's not forget that the roadmap for a resource-efficient Europe is under the economic plan from the European Union. The circular economy package is jointly developed between the economy and environment Directorates General of the European Commission. So this is very much an economic imperative as well as an environmental imperative. Also put up there the recent BS 8001 from the British Standards Institute, guidelines on circular economy. We sit on the Standards Committee for the development of that British standard. So there's a lot going on, which is good, but an awful lot more still to do. Excellent responses from Bliss Plastics Federation and others in the UK in terms of moving this agenda forward. But as I said, there is still a lot more to do, and all of the players need to play their part. So in Wales, I'm sure some of you still don't realise that waste is fully devolved. Certainly in some of the recycling trade press, that's not always apparent. We've had our own waste strategy since 2002. We have our absolute ability to bring in primary legislation and secondary legislation and now taxation in relation to environment. So I said our first waste strategy, Wise About Waste, was published in 2002. We also have the duty I mentioned earlier to achieve, we must do sustainable development under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. We recently published our natural resources policy under the Environment Wales Act Part 1, and that includes resource efficiency, which I'll cover in a minute. We've also set ourselves a statutory 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emission target by 2050. And our government's new strategy linked to its programme for government, published last week or the week before, includes the commitment that we will set out a route map for a more resource efficient economy, aka circular economy, building on our success in recycling, which I might mention in a minute, and reducing the environmental impacts of production and consumption. I could have gone to the Recoup conference today. I had a free invite, but I chose to come here because this is the most important part of the whole chain, the production and manufacturing and design aspect. Get that right and everything else flows. End of pipe solution is not what we want. Under our Wellbeing for Future Generations Act, all of the 7 goals are equal, but I just mentioned the Prosperous Wales one, where we have a goal for a low carbon society using resources efficiently, amongst other things there, in terms of creating jobs, increasing skills, etc., etc. Our natural resources policy, I think we're certainly unique in the UK and fairly rare around the world in producing such a policy. And one of the key aims is to support a more resource efficient economy, to reduce the pressure of the pressure on our natural resources in Wales. Who knows with Brexit whether we may have to mine or extract more raw materials from Wales. Obviously that's good, it creates jobs, but it has an environmental impact. So we need to make sure that all of the resources that we use are used efficiently and reduce the impact on both our environment and the global environment. I've been a bit naughty, I'm just using the recycling circle of the circular economy here. There is of course the equally important agenda of waste prevention, but we need to move to this one planet goal of resource use. Circular economy is a process, it's not an end result. You could have a circular economy and still use 3 planets worth of resources if we keep growing economic growth the way we currently are growing. But we haven't got 3 planets, so we've got to do something to drastically reduce the level of resource use. In Wales, as I said, we have our one planet goal with intermediary goals of 2025 of kind of 2 planets and 1 planet for 2050. We set waste prevention targets and a 70% recycling target for 2025 and a essentially 100% recycling target for 2050. And the thing that sets us apart from the rest of the UK is we set our local authorities statutory recycling targets, and they have a target of 70% for 2025. And they get fined if they don't meet the target, or they have the threat of the fine if they don't meet the target. Again, just focusing on the recycling circle, not forgetting the waste prevention is the most important. We of course recognise we cannot be 100% circular in terms of recyclate and raw materials in Wales. As I've shown there very crudely, we import things from UK, from EU, from the world, China, Asia, etc. And it's quite important to get that recyclate back to where there is primary production and primary manufacture, where it's appropriate. But what we want to do is to increase the Welsh recycling circle, get more of our manufacturers to use recyclate and bring in more manufacturers, new manufacturers, who can use recyclate. And that's very much our economic development imperative there, particularly in a post-Brexit world. So just showing what we're doing so far, conscious of inconsistency is a big problem in terms of collection of recyclate. We published a collections blueprint in 2011 to try and persuade all of our authorities to collect consistently. And I think hopefully most of that is obvious, but it is a curbside sort system where the materials are collected in 3 containers and then sorted into 9 compartments on a vehicle. The secret to this is collecting food waste on the same vehicle, which makes the whole thing very cost effective. So here's an example of the materials that we recommend to be collected, and there is a typical vehicle currently in place used across a number of authorities in Wales. At the moment the recommendation is plastic bottles, pots, tubs and trays, not necessarily film, although we would like to see that collected. So in terms of how we're doing, this figure's slightly out of date now, but it does show you that we've got quite good coverage, very good coverage on plastic bottles, and our recycling rate for plastic bottles is 75%. I think the rate for the UK as a whole is 57%. So we're doing pretty well there. And we need to bear that in mind when everyone keeps pressurising us to do a deposit return scheme. But 75% isn't a bad result. Pots, tubs and trays, 82%, and I suspect that's probably higher now. Plastic film was 41%, but some of our authorities have had problems. And Swansea, for example, is no longer collecting plastic film. So unfortunately, that may have gone down. And that is where our biggest challenge lies, and Neil mentioning that earlier. Please show me the technologies that will separate those mixed streams and produce good quality at the end. I think they do exist, and I think in Interplas in Vienna, we did see some examples. And we'll have to look at that very carefully. So in terms of getting consistency, back in 2013, we had 3 authorities doing the blueprint, the ones in green. For 2015, we had 11. I think we've got 12 now, and we've got 3 or 4 more who are on the cusp of changing. So that's out of 22 local authorities. We have some die-hard comminglers, and we'll have to see what happens with Project Sword and the pressures that there will be on contaminated low-quality material. We have a support program in place, the Collaborative Change Program, to help fund local authorities to change their services and reap the savings of delivering a curbside sort process. But we're not mandating the collections blueprint at the moment. Just a few random slides showing that we're doing quite well on recycling. The first one there shows our targets in the red blobs. We're currently on 64% recycling level, which I think is about 20% higher than England. So we're quite proud of that. When I started the job, we were on about 7%. So we're doing quite well, really, there. The graph below that shows that we're doing quite well on carbon savings as well. So it's not just rubble and low carbon materials we're going for. So that compares us with Northern Ireland and England. On the top right there is just showing the track against the other UK nations. And then the last one we're particularly proud of, some work that Eunomia and Resource Magazine did, showed that we're 2nd in Europe and 3rd in the world in terms of household waste recycling levels. So we're quite proud of that, really. And considering where we've come from, that's not bad going. So what next? A high recycling rate is all very well, but we need to achieve much better economic outcomes and get more of that recyclate used in Wales and more jobs created. Also, is 70%, how do we go from 64% to 70% and maybe higher? So we've done some analysis, or RAP have done it for us, which shows what's in the residual bin. Some various items there, and actually 50%, 50, of what's in the residual bin is easily recyclable. And you can see the plastics figures there of about 15, 16%. So that's plastic film and the hard plastics that could be recycled. So Neil, that's where quite a lot of the film is ending up, and we want to get that out and recycled. Also AHP, some of that is plastic. Another area we have a particular interest in, we have a nappy recycling plant in Crosshands in Wales, and we want more authorities to collect nappies weekly and send them to that plant or any other plant that gets developed. Some things we've got in place, just mentioned the carry bag charge, I'll just throw that in. We're evaluating our waste strategy. We've set up a circular economy task force, or RAP have on our behalf, and the first priority is to produce a route map for plastics in Wales, and there's a meeting shortly in the next week or two to discuss progress on that. We're consulting on potential new legislative levers to achieve a circular economy and more sustainable management of natural resources. Landfill disposal tax, we take over on the 1st of April 2018 for Wales. We're going to introduce a ban on plastic microbeads like the other nations. We've commissioned a study on extended producer responsibility options and for key food and drink packaging. Of course, that will cover plastic. We will consult on the production of a route map for a resource-efficient economy, as I covered earlier. We're going to consult on an 80% recycling target for municipal waste. We're going to bring in regulations to require businesses to keep recyclate separate at source, which I'll cover in a minute. And we have a modest pot of money for 1920 to help with some of this for capital funding. In terms of, we have done a lot with our local authorities. We're going to introduce new regulations to require all business and public sector bodies to keep key recyclable materials, which will include plastic, separate at source, and for those materials to be collected separately, and various other things there. So we're aiming for the regulations to probably be in 2019. This is very similar to current regulations in Scotland. So basically that's the sort of thing we want in every office, in every public space, but we don't want food macerators. I'll just add that in. Or food disposal to sewer, sorry, make that clear. Okay, I think Neil has covered this a little bit earlier. We all get obsessed on recycling, but reducing the first use of resources is the most important thing we need to do, particularly to achieve our one planet level. So I'll just introduce very quickly, and I hope I'm not stealing the thunder of any further speakers, so I'll rattle through this quickly. But circular economy business models are particularly important. And I guess a lot of these more apply to hard plastics, and maybe not quite so much on the packaging side. So we need a systems thinking-led approach to get more circularity, to keep things in productive use for as long as possible. I suppose the equivalent on the liquid side might be refillable containers, for example, for soaps, liquid soaps and that sort of thing. But this is more about things used in an office, IT equipment, etc., etc. But the key thing is using less raw material per unit product is also important. So examples here, which we're looking at and encourages to others to look at: service systems designed for end of life, for longer life, hire and leasing, collaborative consumption, incentivized return and reuse, designing for better asset management, longer life, made to order, and valorizing waste products. Hopefully other speakers will cover these things, but these are all really important. Office furniture is a good example, often made of plastic. There are some good projects underway now to remanufacture those products and keep them in life for an awful lot longer and generate jobs in remanufacturing. Okay, so in terms of plastics recycling, we're aiming to get better consistency of supply and better economy of scale. One of the challenges we have in Wales is being relatively small, but we are able to be more agile and get more people to work more closely together, and we can work a lot more easily with our 22 local authorities, although it still has its challenges. But we're aiming to get consistency of materials from households, businesses, public sector, and construction and demolition, partly through the Collaborative Change Programme, working with authorities, and through those new regulations, and also working with the public sector to get that consistent economy scale of feedstock to supply into the secondary resource sector and then into manufacturing. RAP are doing a survey for us of the market appetite with injection moulders and others across Wales who use plastic for components or in final products. We have quite a big plastics industry in Wales. Most of them use virgin pellet from abroad. Perhaps their costs are increasing with the exchange rates. Maybe they might want to use more secondary materials. We're working on, or RAP are working on that for us. So I said that's what they're currently doing. We have a big innovation programme through our ERDF funding through Smart Cymru that can support innovation if there's new tooling, new design, eco-design, etc. that's needed. Also importantly, it's all very well everyone producing products and components with high recycled content, but who's going to use them? Who's going to buy them? So we see the public sector as a very good vehicle to try and create markets for certain plastic products. Not all, of course. The public sector only buys certain things. But we have considerable leverage there through our policy team, Value Wales, for public sector procurement, and the National Procurement Service, which does frameworks for all public sector bodies across the whole of Wales. So it's a very, very powerful way for us to drive this agenda, and we're working very closely with our colleagues. Trying to join all of this up, I mentioned the RAP Circular Economy Task Force. Good to see Bettina Gilbert in the back there from RAP Wales. This is very much our focus, is plastics. New policy interventions, I'm going to have to speed up a bit. EPR, I'll mention in a minute. We could perhaps mandate recycled content in public procurement, and we could look at things like DRS. We'll see. On EPR, so we've commissioned a study. There should be, hopefully some public announcement this morning. I haven't checked on my emails yet, but I'm now anticipating something coming out soon from the Welsh Government on this study. The whole point of EPR is to ensure that producers bear 100% of the net cost of the end of life of that product, including littering. Now, is that just financial cost, or is it the environmental cost and the environmental externality? I haven't seen much of a discussion of that, but society has to bear the cost of the consequence of that product put onto the market. Is it right that society as a whole bears that cost and the producer doesn't have to pay any attention whatsoever to that? Or should the producer bear the whole cost, or at least a substantial proportion of it, so we get the design that we need for end of life? We obviously want more waste reduction, reuse and recycling through extended producer responsibility, increase the recycled content, so great to hear what P&G or others are doing. And we need a differential charge so that those items that can't be reused or recycled bear a higher proportion of the cost, including perhaps the environmental externality. And then litter, obviously with plastics, I don't know if it's an elephant in the room, hardly really, it's such a big issue. We are under a huge pressure from lots and lots of lobbying organisations. Letters come in daily, there are petitions, there are debates in our parliament all about this issue, and we have to address it. This room, this building needs to address it. Got to engage the whole supply chain, and we need to drive behaviour change. Why is there litter? It's because people keep throwing things away. It's not the producer's fault or the retailer's fault, it is the public. But we've all got a part to play, I think, in changing that behaviour chain. So EPR, there's some very good studies from the European Commission, and here's one from OECD. So one of the main objectives of EPR is to shift the financial responsibility for treating end-of-life products from society or consumer onto the producer. I think I'm coming near to the end. Deposit return scheme. We'll have to see what the results of our study comes up with. That will look at options for key packaging materials. We'll have to see if one of those packaging materials is plastic, and then have to see if a deposit return scheme is looked at. I won't prejudge what the consultants are doing. And just to mention some of the successes we've had so far, and an ERDF program run by RAP, and actually Bettina in the back there, I think you manage that project. So Accelerating Reprocessing Infrastructure Development Program. A number of plastics companies got funding, and a number of collection companies got funding too. So we're very proud of that, and it created around 170 jobs, I think, Bettina, something around that. So a great example. And then finally, this is the prize we're after in terms of savings for our economy. All these figures mostly come from RAP, so apologies I didn't give a reference there. 30,000 jobs we could get in a circular economy, and a big saving in terms of carbon. So basically, we're open for new business and to change our current businesses for innovative solutions for more resource-efficient use of plastic. So spread the word. We want to talk to you, we want to talk to people in this exhibition and widely. We think there are huge economic benefits for us here, and we want to go for it. So thank you very much for listening.